King Charles has apparently just signed something in the middle of the night, in the rain at Sandringham, that immediately locked his own son out of the building's security system, and that is where this entire story begins to feel like something far bigger than a family dispute. It starts to look less like a disagreement between a father and son, and more like a corporate hostile takeover. We are not talking about a public statement. We are not talking about a palace spokesperson making a vague denial. We are talking about physical security doors, biometric scanners, and a leather dispatch box being rushed to a lawyer in Norwich before anyone in London could even ask what was happening. The real story is not simply that a will was changed. It is that the change was allegedly designed to be invisible, irreversible, and completely outside the control of the very people it would affect. And if you follow royal drama because you want to understand the money, the legal machinery, and the decisions happening behind the headlines, make sure you subscribe to Crown Watch, because this is the kind of story that raises questions far beyond what we see in public. So, let's go back to the beginning, because the timeline itself is already a mess, and somehow, that makes everything even more unsettling. It is a freezing Tuesday morning in late 2025. Inside the library at Sandringham, Sir Clive Alderton, the King's longtime private secretary, opens a heavy leather dispatch box. Inside is a single sheet of vellum carrying the sovereign's private cipher. At first glance, the words on the paper appear completely ordinary. It looks like a routine property description for a cottage in Aberdeenshire. But according to the account, the wording is anything but ordinary. It is a prearranged legal trigger. The moment those words are read, the document directs the keeper of the privy purse to freeze the distribution logs connected to the sovereign's personal investment portfolio. That distinction matters. This is not a draft. It is not a proposal. It is not something waiting for a discussion. It is a switch being flipped. And almost at the same time, something even stranger begins happening inside Sandringham. The automated security systems in the communications room suddenly go dark. The terminal screens go blank. The IT staff attempt to reboot the local server, but their administrator codes no longer work. The entire estate appears to be under a digital lockout. Naturally, the first assumption is a cyber attack. People begin to panic. But then a physical inspection of the server room reveals something far more disturbing. A hardware override switch has been manually thrown from inside the king's private dressing room. Charles has allegedly used a physical master key, something dating back to the Cold War era, to cut the estate's external network connection. And why? Because he did not want his digital traffic monitored while the new legal text was being prepared. This is not simply a story about someone being angry. It is a manual physical action that allegedly isolated the entire building from the Central Palace network. Now imagine being William at Kensington Palace. His office shares a financial tracking system connected to the sovereign's private accounts. By 11 in the morning, his chief financial officer notices something immediately. The data flow from Sandringham has stopped. The digital bridge has been severed from the northern end. William tries to call his father directly. The call goes straight to voicemail. He then calls the main switchboard. The response is that the king is resting, and has issued strict instructions not to be disturbed by anyone, including family members. And that is where the first major contradiction appears. If the king is simply resting, why has the entire network been physically disconnected? Why has the financial data flow suddenly stopped? And why is the king's physician seen leaving the private quarters carrying a sealed leather pouch, before handing it to a motorcycle courier without explaining where it is going? The logistics log reportedly contains no flight plan. No travel manifest. Nothing filed with the local constabulary. The courier simply leaves. And suddenly, this entire situation feels less like ordinary royal administration, and more like something taken directly from a spy novel. The institution is operating in darkness. The monarch is allegedly using emergency personal protocols to move legal documents across the country. And his own heir does not know what is happening. That is not normal. Even for a family famous for keeping secrets from one another, that is not normal. So what is actually inside the document? From what can supposedly be pieced together, it is a codicil rather than a complete will. But it is an active amendment designed to alter the distribution of non-crown assets before death. And this is where the legal framework becomes especially important. Under an agreement dating back to 1993, the private wills of deceased British monarchs are automatically sealed from public view for a minimum of 90 years. That system exists to keep the details of royal private wealth away from public scrutiny. But this document is allegedly not a standard will. It is a codicil. And because it is signed while the monarch is still alive, it supposedly operates under different rules. It becomes active immediately. That is why the financial registry freezes. That is why the data flow stops. The change is already moving. And the financial records involved are allegedly about far more than land. They include specific offshore holdings that have never entered the public domain. Corporate bonds. Blue-chip equities. Assets accumulated during the latter part of the 20th century. All separate from the land-based wealth associated with the Duchy of Lancaster. For roughly 30 years, these funds were allegedly handled by a small committee of trustees meeting twice a year in Edinburgh. But on this rainy Tuesday, something else happens. A transfer of ownership form is reportedly submitted digitally to a private Swiss depository only minutes before the network goes dark. The transfer concerns a cache of historical gold bullion held in trust for the descendants of King George V since 1936. So this is no longer a disagreement over who gets a painting, or which family member receives a piece of jewelry. This is a targeted and systematic restructuring of specific institutional reserves. And then comes the detail that changes everything. Charles, according to the account, is not actually breaking the rules. He is using an escape clause allegedly created by his mother. William's legal team examines the historical charters and discovers that Queen Elizabeth II left a specific codicil in 2021 allowing the reigning monarch to unilaterally reallocate certain non-state assets in the event of an exceptional family crisis. That means Charles is allegedly covered. But activating that clause carries a much bigger implication. By using it, the king is formally classifying the situation as a crisis. And that gives him extraordinary legal authority to rewrite the future of private wealth without Parliament, without the cabinet, and completely without the approval of his heirs. That is the part that should make everyone stop and think. Because the family is no longer simply fighting. The king has allegedly classified the situation itself as an institutional emergency. At exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the courier arrives at the Norwich legal office. The senior partner is waiting by the door with a mobile notary stamp. The signatures are checked against the master registry. 4 minutes. That is reportedly all it takes. 4 minutes to turn the amendment into a permanent, legally binding reality that, according to the account, no court in the country can alter. The king closes his ledger. He returns his fountain pen to its stand. And the house falls silent. A heavy stillness settles over the estate. A permanent fracture taking shape without a single public argument. But then the story becomes even more specific. A duplicate copy of the Norwich Amendment arrives on a kitchen island in Montecito, California. A personal assistant cuts through the security tape with a silver letter opener. It is early morning on the West Coast. The paperwork carries a registry code from the Norfolk County Court. And the top sheet contains none of the decorative heraldry normally associated with the royal household. Instead, it looks almost clinical. Cold. Corporate. Like an asset reallocation order. And according to the story, that is exactly what it is. The document allegedly targets the inheritance structure of Prince Harry, dismantling the remaining financial provisions set aside for his lineage in the United Kingdom. The baseline of Harry's supposed financial arrangements goes back to trusts established by his great-grandmother in 1994. Those funds were reportedly structured to distribute millions of pounds in dividends once certain age milestones were reached. The palace had always maintained that private family trusts were legally separate from the Crown's operational funds, and therefore protected from sudden institutional penalties. But page 14 of this amendment allegedly changes everything. The new rule states that any beneficiary maintaining a primary tax domicile outside the British Isles for more than 5 consecutive years is automatically disqualified from accessing the core principle of the trust. The money then reverts immediately to the general pool of the Duchy of Lancaster. And the 5-year marker lines up almost perfectly with Harry's departure from active royal duties in 2020. That makes the provision look less like a future policy, and more like a retroactive penalty. A financial severance engineered after the fact. But then comes an even more severe clause. A non-disclosure mechanism appears on the same page. If a disqualified beneficiary challenges the amendment in court, the legal action allegedly triggers publication of private financial audits connected to their post-royal commercial ventures. In plain English, Stay quiet. Or risk having your business records exposed. That is not merely a family disagreement. It is a legal pressure mechanism disguised as an inheritance clause. Harry's London representative, Fiona Shackleton, receives a secure digital copy at 2 in the afternoon. She asks for clarification. The response is that the amendment was executed under the Sovereign's Personal Property Act, meaning, according to the account, it operates outside the jurisdiction of ordinary family court reviews or public arbitration. There is no appeal. No mediation. No negotiation. Just a locked door. Then Fiona examines the attached schedule of assets. And finds something even stranger. A historic diamond and ruby tiara, originally gifted to Diana by a foreign head of state in 1981, has allegedly been removed entirely from the family inheritance listing. The piece had supposedly been designated for Harry's children during the late 1990s. Now, it is gone. Not sold. Not hidden. Reclassified. Charles has allegedly redefined the tiara as an official diplomatic gift rather than personal property. By doing that, it is transferred into the state collection at the Tower of London. That means it cannot be exported, inherited, or used as collateral for private loans overseas. It is effectively locked inside a museum collection. But the jewelry is only the beginning. There is also a footnote concerning a collection of private letters Harry wrote during his teenage years at Eton. Those letters are supposedly stored inside a climate-controlled vault beneath the library at Sandringham. And the new document transfers their legal copyright directly to the office of the Prince of Wales. William now has absolute control over his brother's early personal history. Under British copyright law, ownership of a physical letter and ownership of publication rights are not necessarily the same thing. But according to this story, Charles has allegedly removed those publication rights from Harry. That creates an enormous legal lever. It could mean Harry would face restrictions when attempting to publish material based on those early family interactions. A childhood memory. A letter. A quotation. Something that once belonged entirely to Harry's personal history could suddenly become legally controlled by another branch of the family. The assistant in Montecito calls Harry on a secure line. The conversation lasts less than 3 minutes. No public statement follows. No emotional outburst. The paperwork goes directly into a home safe. Because whatever Harry's personal reaction may be, the scale of the alleged maneuver requires a calculated response. The financial independence built by the California branch since 2020 is suddenly being tested against an old-world legal apparatus. And that is perhaps the coldest part of the entire story. Charles did not use his voice. He did not use a public announcement. He did not stand in front of cameras and publicly punish his younger son. He allegedly changed a few lines of property code on a rainy Tuesday morning. No shouting. No confrontation. Just a signature. Back in London, the high-end legal firms specializing in royal estate management begin to feel a quiet ripple. Everyone understands that an institutional line has been crossed. The palace is no longer attempting to manage the family rift through public relations. Or temporary adjustments. Or carefully worded statements. Instead, the absolute authority of property law is allegedly being used to enforce compliance. And silence. The clock in the office of the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster strikes 3. The legal teams finalize the registration of the new deeds. They are locked into central archive vaults, where they will supposedly remain hidden from public view. The exiled prince's final cut is complete. And the financial map of the modern monarchy has been redrawn. Without a single public debate. But the story does not end there. Because William is already in the air. His helicopter banks sharply over the waterlogged fields of Norfolk. Then the pilot receives a sudden radio message. Abort the planned flight path to London. Descend immediately. The landing pad near Sandringham's northern boundary is not part of the standard arrival protocols. Normally, the prince's travel requires 48 hours of advance notice to local police, followed by a full security sweep. This landing is completely unscheduled. And it has allegedly been triggered by an emergency signal sent directly from the king's medical team. When William steps out of the helicopter, before the rotor blades have even stopped spinning, he is met by senior land steward David Hill. The steward looks visibly nervous. He tells William that the king's personal physician has issued a strict medical isolation order for the entire upper floor. No family members are permitted to enter the private apartments without a signed clearance certificate. William pushes past him. He heads directly toward the grand hallway. But the central elevator is completely deactivated. The digital display shows a system error. The power supply, according to the account, has been cut from a breaker switch inside the king's private study. So William takes the oak service staircase. And when he reaches the top landing, he finds two heavy, reinforced iron security doors blocking the main corridor. These doors were reportedly installed in 2023 following an international security review. They can only be unlocked through a biometric keypad requiring the fingerprint of either the sovereign or the head of the Metropolitan Police Royalty Protection Command. William places his thumb against the glass scanner. A red light. Twice. Then a low electronic tone. His biometric access has been erased from the local system registry within the previous 2 hours. Someone has intentionally stripped the Prince of Wales of his emergency entry privileges inside his own family's private residence. William calls the duty officer at Scotland Yard. The answer is devastating. The access change was not ordered by police command. It was executed directly from a master administrative terminal inside the office of the keeper of the Privy Purse. The king has allegedly used his sovereign prerogative to issue a direct administrative warrant temporarily overriding the standard security hierarchy. So there is no override. No appeal. No. I'm the future king, let me in. The door does not care. William looks through the narrow glass viewing slit. And there he sees Sir Clive Alderton walking down the inner corridor. In his hands is a locked leather dispatch case. With a blue customs tag attached to the handle. That blue tag indicates an international diplomatic transit item. Which means the documents inside are allegedly not destined for a standard legal archive in London. Or Norwich. They are being prepared for immediate transportation to a foreign jurisdiction. Potentially an overseas territory. Or a crown dependency such as the Isle of Man, where asset protection trusts can operate outside the reach of standard UK high courts. William knocks sharply against the glass. Clive stops. He looks at him. Then slowly shakes his head. He raises a single sheet of paper. A signed executive order bearing the king's personal signature. The instruction is explicit. All staff are to maintain total operational silence until the document leaves the estate boundaries. William steps back. Any further physical confrontation could create an enormous institutional scandal among the household staff. So instead, he walks downstairs to the ground floor library. He opens his laptop. And begins coordinating with his solicitors in London. He pulls up the historical charters governing the separation of private royal properties. Because if his father succeeds in moving personal assets into an overseas trust, William's future financial independence as king could become tied to conditions established by the legal representatives of a monarch who came before him. And that is the real issue. It is not simply about money. It is about control. The next reign could be governed by a legal structure specifically designed to outlive the people who created it. Outside, the rain finally begins to clear. A heavy fog rolls across the parkland. Then a black sedan with tinted windows pulls up beside the side entrance. William watches from the library window. Clive steps into the back seat, still holding the leather dispatch case tightly against his chest. The car drives away toward a private military airfield near the coast. The window for internal family negotiation has completely closed. The king's last-minute amendment is no longer an internal palace disagreement. It is now a legally active, physically secured reality moving beyond the geographic borders of the United Kingdom. And then comes the witnessing. The clock strikes 4. 3 individuals enter the ground floor conference room. They do not sit. Each carries a small leather-bound notebook and a black fountain pen. Under British law, amendments to a sovereign's private will cannot simply be witnessed by family members, palace employees, or anyone who stands to benefit from the estate. So the witnesses are Dame Sarah Aspen, a senior High Court judge. Sir John Baker, of the Chancellor of the Diocese of Norwich. And Professor David Starkey, an expert in constitutional history. The Wills Act of 1837 requires witnesses to be physically present at the same time. They must see the testator sign. Then each witness must sign in the presence of the testator. The palace legal team insists on strict adherence to the process to prevent any future challenges in probate court. But then William enters through a side door. He is holding a printed copy of the Wills Act Amendment Regulations from 2024. He walks directly to the head of the table and drops the document down with a sharp slap. He argues that any amendment dealing with the reallocation of historical family heirlooms requires a secondary certificate of verification from the Victoria and Albert Museum. The judge looks at the paper. Then she looks up at William. Her response is devastating. The king has already secured that specific certificate during a private audience in London 3 days earlier. The paperwork is complete. There is no procedural opening for intervention from the heir's legal office. William's team has been outmaneuvered on the administrative front. Then the private secretary brings the master copy of the amendment into the room. 3 pages. Bound with green silk cord. Sealed with the private signet ring of the House of Windsor. The signature spaces are still blank. But Professor Starkey notices something on the back page. A small blue ink stamp. Registry Office of the Duchy of Cornwall. That stamp suggests that a portion of the assets being redistributed belong not to the king's personal portfolio, but to the prince's own estate. William has not authorized any transfer of his duty assets to an outside beneficiary. He demands an immediate halt until his financial director can review the asset register. The room becomes tense. The Chancellor refuses to open his ink bottle until the discrepancy is explained. And then comes the detail that makes the entire strategy look even more calculated. Sir Clive pulls a secondary folder from his briefcase. Inside is a signed property exchange agreement dated 2023. During the restructuring of royal residences that year, William had signed what appeared to be a routine administrative cross-lease for a block of land near Highgrove. But according to the account, William had not realized that a hidden subclause inside that lease granted the reigning monarch a reciprocal right to reallocate an equivalent value of non-land assets in the event of a family restructuring. A routine piece of estate paperwork. Something William may have signed without examining every single line. Had allegedly become a permanent lever over the family's private wealth. And that is the kind of detail that makes you wonder. How many other land leases could contain hidden clauses waiting to be activated? William steps away from the reading desk. His face is tight. The private secretary goes upstairs to bring the king down. At exactly 20 minutes past 4, Charles enters the room. He is leaning heavily on a silver-topped walking cane. He does not look at his son. He walks straight to the reading desk. He removes his glasses from his pocket. He sits down. He dips his fountain pen once into the inkwell. And signs his name at the bottom of the 3rd page. The 3 witnesses step forward in silence. Dame Sarah signs first. Then Sir John. Then the professor. Each signature is accompanied by a small physical wax impression from the Sandringham state seal. The entire process takes less than 3 minutes. No words pass between father and son. Not one. The moment the final witness finishes, the private secretary takes the document. He places it back inside the leather dispatch case. Then locks the brass clasps with a small key attached to his watch chain. The paper is now, according to the story, a permanent and legally active reality. Something that cannot simply be undone by a family court, a parliamentary committee, or even a future monarchical decree. Charles stands. He adjusts his coat. Then walks back toward the elevator doors, which have now been switched back on by the security team. He leaves without making a statement. The witnesses pack their notebooks and prepare to leave for Norwich railway station. William remains alone inside the library. He looks down at the empty reading desk. The pen is still sitting in its stand. And within a single afternoon, the administrative framework surrounding his future reign has been permanently altered. Then the palace falls silent. The heavy oak doors close with a soft final thud. William walks slowly toward the writing desk. The silver-topped cane is gone. But a small sheet of blotting paper remains on the green leather desk mat. It carries the faint reversed impression of the king's signature. Still dark with fresh black ink. The facts of the morning's transaction are now locked inside the leather dispatch case moving toward the coast. The amendment is registered under the Sovereign's Personal Property Act, placing the distribution of these specific funds, according to the account, entirely beyond the reach of standard British probate courts. The central financial registry of the monarchy remains frozen to outside audits. Even the Treasury Department is supposedly unaware of the new asset map. Then the internal phone system in the library rings. It is the keeper of the Privy Purse, Michael Stevens. He confirms that the main accounting terminals in London have automatically locked down 3 major overseas investment files as a direct result of the King's signature. The blocked files contain liquid capital reserves associated with the Duchy of Lancaster. By placing these files under a conditional trust amendment, Charles has allegedly ensured that his successor cannot access the core capital without meeting specific and highly restrictive management conditions drafted by the Norwich legal team. For more than a century, the independence of the duchy was used to protect the family from political interference. Now, Charles has allegedly turned that same shield inward, using it as an absolute check on his own family's financial future. William opens the desk drawer. Inside, he discovers a small red leather diary from 2024 that his father had left behind. Inside the back cover, taped beneath a list of estate phone numbers, is a physical bank statement from a private depository in the Isle of Man. The balance is exactly 0. A massive portion of the family's private offshore wealth has allegedly been emptied from the account just 24 hours before the signing. William demands an immediate digital trace. Because if the money has been moved to a foreign charity, or a private foundation outside the United Kingdom, then the core financial strength of the next reign could be severely compromised. The answer arrives within 10 minutes. A secure fax. The transfer confirmation carries the official stamp of the High Court of Justice. And then comes the revelation. The king did not hide the money. He did not send it to California. Instead, according to the account, he legally transferred the entire offshore balance into a permanent independent endowment fund dedicated exclusively to the maintenance and restoration of historical state apartments at Windsor Castle and Holyrood Palace in Scotland. And that is what makes the strategy so difficult to reverse. By tying the private wealth directly to the upkeep of state buildings, Charles has allegedly made it impossible for a future monarch to divert those specific funds into personal accounts or private family settlements. The money is permanently locked inside the institution itself, protected by a legal covenant that, according to the story, cannot be reversed without an act of Parliament. William looks out the window. The fog begins to lift. Staff members move quietly through the lower levels of the house. Carefully, almost hesitantly. The realization has spread. Something fundamental has changed. The traditional lines of authority have been altered within the space of a single afternoon. The palace is silent because the old rules of compromise no longer seem to apply. The relationship between sovereign and heir is no longer being governed by unspoken family agreements or shared institutional goals. It is now governed by the cold, precise language of property deeds, trust clauses, and biometric access restrictions. Rules that leave almost no room for personal negotiation. No emotional appeal. No father-son conversation capable of simply making everything disappear. William closes his laptop. He gathers his papers. He places them inside his briefcase. Then he walks out of the library and down the grand hallway, passing portraits of his ancestors as he goes. He knows that when he eventually inherits the throne, he may be stepping into a financial structure that has already been redesigned to limit his personal freedom of action. A lasting parting gift from a father who, in this account, chose preservation of the institution over harmony within his own house. William steps back onto the concrete landing pad. His helicopter is waiting. As the aircraft rises into the gray afternoon sky, he looks down at the sprawling red brick silhouette of Sandringham House below. From above, the building appears completely still. Quiet. Almost untouched. An enduring monument to a historical family that has allegedly just redrawn its own internal borders in total secrecy. And as the silence settles over Sandringham House, the moment begins to feel like a permanent turning point in the financial history of the House of Windsor. Using an old-world legal apparatus, King Charles has allegedly redrawn the lines of inheritance, institutional leverage, and family control, all behind closed doors. And perhaps the most unsettling part of the entire story is that none of it required a raised voice. No confrontation. No dramatic public announcement. No explosive argument. Just a fountain pen. A wet Tuesday. And a series of legal documents allegedly designed to outlive everyone in the room.